wish Jacob Wood a happy birthday September the 4th. Avery Bullard, happy birthday September the 5th. And Rosanna Willis, happy birthday September the 6th. Anyone else have a birthday or anniversary you might have overlooked? Okay. Paul writes the letter that's somewhat along the line of our Sunday school lesson this morning, but not particularly. He talks about a lot of his personal experiences here. Now, he's in prison in Rome when he writes this letter to the church at Philippi. And he has been there for a while, and I think he spent a year or two there in prison, was released, and went on another mission tour. And finally he was arrested and taken back to Rome the second time, where he did not get released, but he was put to death, as he talked about in the book of 2 Timothy. Now, we find Paul here in prison, and his theme of this letter is to rejoice in the Lord. You say, well, how does one rejoice in prison? Well, I don't know. I've never been in prison. I don't know if I could rejoice or not. I'd probably have to learn to. But nevertheless, when he receives communication from the Philippians, we don't know exactly how that he learned some of the things he speaks of, and he does not give us some details on some of the things that he mentions. But he does give us a message here that we can take to heart. In the 10th verse, where Paul is writing, and he has spoken to this church, he's give them instruction, and now he gets personal, and he said, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Notwithstanding, ye have done well, that ye did communicate with my affliction. Now ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For even in Thessalonica you sent once and again unto my necessity, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. But I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." While Paul is in prison, and he speaks here that he rejoiced once even in this statement. But now, in verse 10, he said, "I rejoiced in the Lord greatly." Here again, he is in a Roman prison. I was working on the job once where some block clearers were, and there was this particular person who was the tender or the laborer, and the subject came up about talking about prison and things of that nature, and some of us said, well, we didn't think that'd be good, and he finally spoke up and he said, "Oh, that Holiday Inn ain't too bad." Well, Paul wasn't staying in what a prisoner would call a Holiday Inn. It was probably cold in the winter, hot in the summer, musty, sweaty, as the walls may have been deteriorating with the atmosphere. The food probably wasn't good. The facilities were probably as terrible as you can probably imagine. And here he says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. But now he didn't rejoice over those things. He's looking to something more important than that. He looks to the fact that the church at Philippi was concerned about him, and they were caring for him as best they could. He said that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again. Well, we don't know what happened the first time, what they sent to him, or how that they assisted him. We don't know what care they had given him first of all, but here at the last, he said it's flourished again. In other words, it was very well received. It was looked at as being something that was really appreciated, and it fulfilled his need. And he commends them for wanting to have done more, but they lacked opportunity. Now, did you ever want to help somebody and you just didn't have the resources or didn't have the time or whatever? Here is a church that Paul says that they wanted to help him more. Because in the last part of this, he said, wherein you were also careful. In other words, they wanted and they looked, but ye lacked opportunity. We don't know why they lacked opportunity. Paul doesn't give us even a hint. It might have been that there was a ship not sailing that way. It may have been that Rome wouldn't allow anything to come to him. It may have been that the hearts of the people in Philippi were with him, but they didn't have anything to send. They just lacked opportunity. Maybe they didn't have it to give. But now the thought was there, and how does Paul know this? We don't even know how he received a communication from the church at Philippi as to what they wanted to do and why they lacked opportunity. He just leaves us hanging there, but he says the church had a heart to do him good. Well, we look just a little bit further in verse 11, and this is a verse that's, I think, very important. He said, not that I speak in respect of wont. He wasn't sending out letters pleading for help. He wasn't sending out requests. We don't know that he done anything. He had everything to keep him alive and to keep him well. He wasn't wanting for many things because, look at the next four words. For I have learned. Learned. There's some things in life that just come natural. I mean, we're born, we just breathe. It's just something natural. That's the way we're built. A baby will cry when it's hungry or needs changing, one or the other. We just do a lot of things out of habit. You won't touch a hot stove but one time, and you'll know better the next time. We learn about a lot of things. Many lessons have to be learned. Skills have to be learned and honed and polished. When we start, we're not as good as we hope to be in learning a trade. And some people, they work and they get better and better and better, and they can perfect things. And Paul said, for I have learned. Now, this is a wonderful and a great lesson in whatsoever state I am, whatever the conditions. Now, Paul had been a Pharisee back there in Jerusalem. He was from a well-to-do family. We can ascertain this by the fact that he tells one of the Roman rulers up before the court who said he was, with a great price, I earn this citizenship? And Paul said, but I was freeborn. Now, his father was a citizen of Rome, and he automatically became a citizen. He said, I was freeborn. He was a citizen from the first day of his birth. We don't know what his father done to gain citizenship. We don't know the circumstances. Paul just says that he was freeborn. Now, that leaves us to understand that he was above many of the Jews, and that he was to receive all the rights of the law. He was to be protected by Rome, and he called upon that once, and he was sent to Rome when he appealed to Caesar. Now, he was educated in the best school in Jerusalem, sitting at the feet of Gamaliel, who was the most respected rabbi probably in the whole nation of Israel at the time. Now, he said, I have learned in whatsoever state I am. Now, when he became a missionary, he became a pauper as far as physical assets were concerned. He said, all the things that I thought well of and I thought was necessary, he said, I looked upon them as refuse, and I walked away and left them behind. And he realized that what he had gained in Jesus Christ was far more valuable than what he walked away from. Now, he said, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Have we learned the lesson of contentment? That's an important question. Or, sometimes we fall into a state where we may be in want, and we may become depressed, and we may not get the things in life. We may be passed over on the job for a promotion that some no good gets the job. As once I heard a statement, and sadly, but it's a whole lot of truth to it. They was talking about a situation like this, and somebody spoke up and said, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And somebody else spoke up right behind them and said, yeah, and oftentimes it's what you know on who is the reason you get that promotion, and somebody more qualified gets looked over. Well, humanity is not very gentle to a lot of people. Life is not equal to all people. Now, Paul said he had learned in all these conditions to be content. He had not become depressed. He was not in a position to protest, and I doubt he would have if he could. But here he is in prison. He said, I'm content. I've learned to be content. The expectations that he had were not great, I'm sure, at this time. Now, he also says in verse 12, I know. Now, this is by experience. I know how to be abased or to be made low, and I know how to abound or to be prosperous. You see, he had been in all sorts of situations, bad and good and all in between. But he said, I have learned to be content, not to worry, and not to do unreasonable things. He said he knows how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry. Now, we're more satisfied when we are full, aren't we? He didn't complain, it seems, about the food there in the prison. Now, sometimes we may grumble about what we have. Sometimes we may rejoice. we ought to be happy if we're eating a bologna sandwich, or we are carving on a filet mignon, or something maybe even better. But let me say that I have ate a lot more bologna sandwiches than I ever ate filet mignons. I was working with a guy one time. We was taking a break, and he said, "I'm not doing another thing till I sit down here and eat this bologna sandwich." I said, "Well, I guess that saved a lot of lives." And he looked up and said, "Yeah, probably killed a lot of people too." Well, there might have been some truth to that. We'll not investigate it. But the whole point is, whichever we are, we ought to rejoice in having the food that we have and the substance that we need. He said that he abounded everywhere and in all things. I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry. So he knew all the situations, both to abound and to suffer need. You know, Paul wrote to Timothy when he was there in prison the second time, and he encouraged him to come quickly. And he said, you bring the parchments and the books, and he said, the cloak that I left in Troas, I believe it was. He was cold, and he needed that coat. He needed it to warm himself. He was in need, and he just asked him to bring it as quick as possible. Well, now, we can't hold that against him. But now, let's look at verse 13. And let's try to make a joint relationship between 11 and 13. Now, in 13, he said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Now, in verse 11, what did he say? Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned, whatsoever state that I am, to be content. Now, what can we say in that relationship? He said he had learned, based on his experience and his suffering for the Lord, and receiving blessings from the Lord, and even from the church at Philippi, he says that I know I can overcome all my wants and needs and my disappointments and whatever. And he's very positive, based on his previous experience of learning. He now says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. He was not trying to do it on his own like he was when he was wanting to destroy the churches and to stamp out Christianity when he was a Pharisee. Through Christ, who had brought him so far, and through so many trials and so many efforts that seemed to be failures, when he was accosted and run out of town, stoned unto death, and he came back into the city the next morning. You see, he had been caught up to the third heaven even at this time. And he saw things that he couldn't talk about. And he heard language that he didn't know what was. And he says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. My daddy used to say, I tell him I can't do something. He said, can't never did anything. He meant to get on with it, to do the best you can. Sometimes we may not have all the resources and all the strength that we need, but in the spiritual world and most of the physical world, we need to rely far more on Christ Jesus than our own efforts. And we need not give up because we don't have everything that we really need or desire. There's a saying that poor folks have to do poor ways. Well, there's truth to that. He said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthen me. He wasn't relying on society. He wasn't relying on someone else. He just knew that Christ was going to bring him through in all situations based on his previous experience. Now, he commends the church at Philippi. He said, notwithstanding ye have done well, that ye did communicate with my affliction. He does not tell us what his affliction is, other than it may be in the prison there. But they had communicated with him. He said, now ye Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. You see, he speaks well of them. They had a heart to support, even though they lacked opportunity back here where he's writing in the 10th verse, but they had communicated, and he commends them for it. He said, for even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again unto my necessity. Here we have a precedent for a church to help those who are in need, those who have necessities. We ought to be forthcoming, as we have an example here in the Scriptures. Well, he commends them for helping him even in Thessalonica. He said, not because I desire a gift. Now, he wasn't begging for a handout, but now look, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. Can a church build up rewards? Now, I'm fully convinced, and I have preached, that every church has its own personality. You say, well, a church can't have a personality. Yes, they can. You go around and you visit churches, and you'll find a lot of different ways of thinking. You'll find a lot of different ways of you're being received. And you might go away and say, that's an exceptionally friendly church. It's an outgoing church. And you might find some where you would say that they were unfriendly, that they didn't have an outgoing personality. Well, if that be the case, can a church build up rewards when the judgment comes? For being a part of an assembly that looks to do good, and that they are free-hearted and ready to help all those in need. And Paul says, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. You see, he commends the church at Philippi. He said, but I have all and abound. I have all and abound. Here he was, here in the prison, and he says he has everything. He's abounding. He said, I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you. You know, we don't know much about what this is that he received. He says, an odor of sweet smell. I suppose this was something that might take the odor out of the air in that old prison cell. It's difficult to say. They weren't passing out right guard to those prisoners in those days. I'm sure it was very, very bad. A sacrifice acceptable. He doesn't elaborate on this. He doesn't tell us anything much at all. He said a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. Whatever it was that the Philippians sent him pleased God. They weren't pleasing themselves. They were pleasing God, and they were contributing to his messenger who is in jail. And he's very, very thoughtful. and he sends a message back. Now, what we should strive to do is like the Philippian church. We ought to think about doing things well-pleasing unto God, doing things that would build up rewards. And he says in verse 19, "But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." Now, is there anything that the Lord cannot supply? If we are patient, if we are well-pleasing, if we are looking to God and not to the world, if we are looking and pleading with Christ Jesus, will he not give us all that we need? Oh, there's a lot of things now in the world that people talk about. Let's just take an example. When Henry Ford started building the automobiles that he built, and others, they didn't have all these fancy gadgets and things that they have now. Most everything associated with the T model was simply to get you from point A to point B and back to point A. I dare say now that people go out and they look at these real fancy automobiles with these extremely high prices, and probably 50 to 60, maybe 70% of that has absolutely nothing to do with getting you from point A to point B and from point B back to point A. It's added luxuries that the world has caused us to look after. You say, well, are you condemning? No, I'm just as guilty as everybody else, and I got a blank check or cancel check to prove it. But God shall supply all our needs through Christ Jesus if we'll just look for him. And you know, the lost person's greatest need is Jesus Christ himself. To receive Jesus Christ and salvation. We'll stand together. If you're here today and you don't know Jesus Christ and he's not your friend, won't you come to him today? All you have to do is just surrender to Jesus and say, here I am. Everybody's equal at the foot of the cross. It don't make any difference who you are.